You might recall from an earlier module that we installed a npm package called Buffer in order to do base64 encoding for our login call to GitHub. This was quite easy to do, but I would like to show you how you can call into Objective-C to do the encoding instead. We build up a base64 encoded representation of the username and password delimited by a colon. This is what we use to do basic HTTP authentication, and we had to use the buffer module here because the JavaScript engine in which React Native executes doesn't have a built-in function to do base64 encoding. At least not one that I could find. To add our code, we start by creating a header file. We call ours encoding.h. In this header file, we include the React Bridge module header file. We declare a new interface called encoding, on which we state that we want to implement NSObject with a React Bridge module category. This is weird, I know. I've worked in several languages and I've found that if I haven't worked with Objective-C for a while, it takes me a few days to figure out what's what again. Now let's provide an implementation for our encoding interface. To do this, I create a file called encoding.m. The first thing I've got to do in here is include the encoding interface which we just created. And now I pull in the RCT root view header file. Now I use the implementation syntax to specify that I'm providing an implementation for the encoding header. First thing we do in here is call the RCT export module function. This is a C function which we've pulled in from React, and that's why we can call it using this syntax. You'll see later on, when we want to interact with an Objective-C function, we're going to use quite a different syntax. Again, I know this is all a bit weird, but don't worry. The purpose of this code is not to make you understand Objective-C, but rather to see how we can interrupt between JS and Objective-C. Now we use the RCT export method function and start the opening parenthesis, immediately followed by the name of the function as we want it to be seen in JavaScript later on. After the name of the function, we use a colon and specify that we want a NSString parameter with the name of str. We want another parameter on this function, a React response sender block, and we want the parameter name to be callback. This is probably one of the weirdest things in Objective-C to get used to. Why do I need to type callback twice? Once over here and once over here. It's because this one over here is used as part of the method name, and this one over here is used as the parameter name for referring to it in the function. Strange, eh? But you'll get used to it pretty quickly if you work with Objective-C for a few days in a row. Anyway, I suspect you're not that interested in learning Objective-C because you're doing a React Native course after all. So let's power through it and get back to our beloved JavaScript. To get the encoded string, we declare a new variable with a type of NSData to the result of calling the data using encoding method on the string parameter which we passed in, and pass NSUTF-8 string encoding to it as our target encoding. Now we instantiate a new string and assign that to the result of calling a method on our NSData variable. The method we call is base64 encoded string with options, and we give it an option flag of 0. I basically got this encoding logic as is from the net, so don't worry about how it works, but rather focus on the next part. We type callback and add some parameter parentheses. See, just like with JavaScript. To create an array, we need to use the @ symbol before we can use square brackets with our values, which in our case is just one variable, the base64 encoded string. So if you've never seen Objective-C before and you feel like your eyeballs are bleeding, I don't blame you. But you really do get used to it pretty quickly if you wanted to do that for some weird reason. I'm just joking. Some people use the language really well and they love it. It just takes a bit of getting used to. The important parts in here are that we imported this RCT root view header over here, added a callback parameter of type React response sender block over here, and then called the callback over here. But just doing that won't work. To make the code available, we need to use the React export module function as soon as we start our implementation block, and call React export method on each function we want to export. We need to get this compiled into our Xcode project, and if you've worked with Visual Studio before, this should be very familiar to you. this project in Xcode needs to be made aware that the files we created are now part of it. We right-click on this folder over here and select Add Files. We then choose our files in here. All these default options are fine, so we click on Add. Because we've added new files to the project, we press play, which starts everything up again.